Hello and welcome everyone. In this video I'll show how I've made swamp trees for your miniatures and terrain scenery. As reference and inspiration, I looked at these American cypress trees. I will try and create something along the lines of these and then use them in a bigger terrain piece I'm building, which is done very soon. Alright, here we go. What I have here are some dried jungle vines I found at my local garden center. You can use other types of dried wood, but I find these vines have a nice texture on them. Using this small hacksaw, I sawed off a few larger pieces to serve as tree trunks. I then used some of the thinner pieces and sawed them off from an angle, so I can place them on the trunk at the bottom. I also saved the sawdust, which will come in handy later. What I have here is some air drying modeling clay, which I will use on the tree trunk. In order to preserve your leftover modeling clay, I'd recommend packing it the way I will show you here, and then store it in a cool and dry place. At this stage I will attach some of the clay to the bottoms of the trunks using super glue. So you will end up with something looking a bit like a German grenade, and I will now attach the smaller bits onto the trunk. Using a clay shaper and some water, I smooth out the clay. For the tree tops, I will now use these dried branches, but you could use any type you like. I then use this small pin vise to drill out a few holes in the branches and then attach a piece of paper clip to them using super glue. Next up, I also drilled a few holes in the tree trunk where I wanted the branches to be, and then attached them. At this stage I will make some makeshift body to serve as a cheap filler. I used some of the modeling clay and added some hot water to it. I then kept stirring it until it became a paste and added some PVA glue to it for some extra strength. applied this paste to all the gaps and the branches around the tree trunk. I used a bit of water to clean any excess. When this was all dry, I applied a layer of full strength PVA to the clay and then added the sawdust over it we saved earlier. This will give it a bit more texture and hide any fingerprints you may have on it. So for the next step, I will make a quick and liquid glue mixture. I used PVA, distilled water and a drop of dish soap to make it flow a bit better. In order to make the painting process easier, I added a few drops of acrylic ink to the glue mixture. I will now try to replicate something looking like Spanish moss. And after a bit of experimenting, I found that this cheap cotton works best. I soak a few pieces in the glue mixture and then attach them to the branches. Now this can be quite tedious work, but once you get the hang of it, you'll be fine. Once attached, I pull them a bit downwards to create this pointy effect. When the cotton had dried for a few hours, I attached the trees to some cork in order to paint them easier. As the next step, I will apply a coat of primer to the trees. I'd recommend using a cheap primer for this and save your quality primer for your miniatures. Next up, I applied a base coat of Desert Tan to all the trees. When this was done, I applied some shadows here and there using Camo Medium Brown. Afterwards, I applied a light overspray using Green Brown. When the paint had dried, I applied a light dry brush over the bark using Green Gray. This will bring out the texture a bit more. So at this stage I will apply some washes to the trees. You can use inks or acrylic washes for this, but my personal preference is using an oil wash for this. I will mix in a few drops of oil paint and then dilute them with odorless white spirit. I applied the cream brown mixture to the entire trunk and then some Van Dyke brown to the deepest recesses. After around an hour of drying time, I used this sponge dipped in some white spirit to clean up some of the raised areas of the trunks. Next, it's time to paint all the hanging moss. I used a mixture of green grey and Russian uniform to do this.
6.5 hours later.
And for a bit of variation, I applied some German field grey here and there. What I have here are some dried filigrane trees. I will use these serving as fine branches with some foliage on them. For the foliage on the branches, here's a few examples you can use. I decided to use the miniature oak leaves in this case, since I had some laying around. I applied some PVA to some random spots and then added the foliage to it. To make some fine moss for the tree trunks, I'll use a few of these green herbs and then grind them into a powder using a coffee grinder. After adding some PVA here and there, I sprinkled some of this spicy moss over it. So, since we're on the theme of dried things, I'll also apply some of these tree roots and some moss to decorate the bottoms of the trunks a bit more. I applied some PVA once again and then added them randomly. To seal in these tiny plants, I applied some of the scenery glue we made earlier using a pipette. When everything had set and dried, I applied a coat of matte varnish over the trees to seal in everything. I'm gonna use my airbrush here, but you could also use a spray can. So here we have the finished product. You can use them as they are now, but as I said earlier, I will use them in a terrain piece I'm building at the moment. Alright, so that'll wrap up this video. I really hope you liked it and that it was of any use to you. So I will leave you now with some pictures of the finished models. I wish you all a happy holidays. Thank you for watching, stay tuned for more and take care.
Work complete.